Hello, everybody. Welcome to News Without Prejudice. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing fantastic. We've got there's a lot of noise going on with the Trump administration. We've put 11 billion bajillion % tariffs on China now. We are at like,
going to be so productive.
We announced like 140% or something last recording, and then like 2 hours later, Trump was actually like 250% or some 230 or something like that.
Lord Almighty.
That's getting boring. We've talked about nothing but tariffs for the last 2 weeks, so we're pivoting into the new Trump administration's dispute with Harvard Law.
Yes.
With Harvard, I should say, with the university writ large. So, Lindsey, tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah.
Just sort of the overview of the situation.
The Trump administration has made some serious, significant demands of 7 private education institutions in the past couple months. I believe all 6 out of 7 of them have been Ivy League colleges. And Harvard is the latest, and it is the very first to push back against Donald Trump's unreasonable orders. So they're not capitulating.
Well, I should say that like Columbia, another Ivy League institution, initially was the first to capitulate publicly, received a list of lesser demands from the Trump administration, adhered to all of them, and then Trump turned around like 2 weeks later and just gave them more demands. And then them and a number of other Ivy League institutions. And so the Ivy League institutions actually initially complied with a lot of the Trump administration. They took down DEI language from their website, but a lot of it was symbolic, right? It got to the point where Trump was now making substantial demands. His most recent round of demands was for federal oversight of their curriculum, hiring policies, on-campus speech policies, and that they not admit students with, quote, hostile to American interests and ideology, whatever that means. It was all very vague.
Whatever that
Which
means.
is, I think, what the Board of Trustees exactly was concerned about, is like, this is basically the voiding of our independence. And Trump said, if you don't do these things, we're gonna pull your funding, right? And that happened. They got hit with, I think, like $9.2 billion of funding freezes all at once. And so we're gonna talk about that, and also more importantly, what Harvard will do next, how the next 24 to 50 billion months plays out, basically, which is probably what this is going to take. So first thing I want to talk about, Harvard has a tremendous endowment, which is basically a fund.
Money.
It just basically means a fund. Yeah, exactly. It's from alumni donations, investments, tuition. That's why most of the Ivy League schools are tuition free. They're hard to get into, but they're tuition free, generally speaking, except for a very small amount of their student body. And so Trump's thesis, his argument is that, like, hey, these schools are extremely well funded, therefore we don't have to pay them. And more importantly, we'll get into this later, it falls down to the designation of 501c3 nonprofit organizations. I think that's a good place to start. So for a little bit on Harvard specifically, private Ivy League research institution, has a law school, has a medical, got all the schools. It was founded in October 28, 1636, before the United States was founded.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but named after its first benefactor, Puritan clergyman John Harvard. Real John Helldiver moment. It is the oldest institution of higher learning on the continental United States. Also arguably one of the most prestigious. I personally am a Dartmouth man, but what can I say?
I think it's also one of the most iconic.
Yeah.
I've been seeing a lot of Legally Blonde and Elle Wood memes.
Oh, yeah.
After all of this Harvard
But
stuff.
like it's hard to get into.
Yeah, exactly.
The law school was founded in 1807. Basically, these guys are the bluest of blue bloods that can be found.
Yes.
So I want to start with the definition of a 501c3 a nonprofit organization. So the Trump administration has basically not only did they freeze a bunch of funding, but they put in an administrative order with the IRS to basically examine Harvard's tax-exempt status, because higher institutions are, generally speaking, tax-exempt. Sometimes even private ones. A lot of them are private. Harvard is a private institution, but a lot of private schools, like, everyone is tax exempt as long as you're running a quote unquote nonprofit. I say nonprofit because their endowment does have billions of dollars in revenue every single year, and we'll get into that. But a nonprofit organization is one that's run not for profit, but not every nonprofit is a 501c3.
Okay.
501c3, which is something a lot of people have like heard bandied about.
I've heard it, but I have no clue.
That's not actually an organization. That's just a tax status designated by the IRS.
Okay.
It's administrative status. So like not all nonprofits are 501c3s, not all 501c3s are nonprofit.
Okay.
You know, there's some there's some variance about what type of nonprofit you are.
Sure. Okay.
Essentially a 501c3 is any type of nonprofit that meets specific IRS requirements for tax-exempt status. And what the Trump administration is likely going to hang its hat on is that you cannot lobby for political causes as a 501c3.
Okay.
Which is why churches cannot technically... Churches are a great 501c3 common example. You can't actually make political statements on behalf of the church while in church or attending church because that's one of the things prohibited by federal law.
That's interesting.
So what the Trump administration is arguing, or will charitably likely argue, is that like, hey, Harvard is actually pushing a political agenda, therefore we should not offer them tax-exempt status. They owe taxes on.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's the avenue they're going to try and get this rabid wolf.
So, but what do you think? Would you say that they have a political agenda that they're trying to push?
The distinguishing element is that Harvard is generally speaking not giving political speeches as an institution. Their professors are welcome to as private citizens because
and the students
they have free speech rights, but they're basically saying that like there's some grand conspiracy. It's very vague, so I'm honestly not sure what Trump is saying. But charitably, my interpretation is that Trump is saying that like, hey, there's some grand conspiracy to only admit people you like and all the people that go out and give speech. Yeah, left-wingers. It's some vague culture grievance that honestly I am not, nor anyone else I think is very qualified to clarify.
Yeah.
There are, we'll take it from the top here. There are foundations that can lobby for political causes, and those are 501c4s.
So like the ACLU?
Well, actually, that's really interesting because I was actually going to bring up the ACLU as a great example. So there are 501c4s and 501c3s. The ACLU of Washington is actually comprised of two separate entities. And I swear we didn't plan this. Lindsey brought that up all on her own because the American Civil Liberties Union, a very prestigious civil advocacy organization, you can make donations to them. So you may say, well, that doesn't sound right. They're not are they tax exempt? Why are they doing all this lobbying and political action? It's because it's comprised of two entities, the American Civil Liberties Union of Washington, using Washington as the example, and the American Civil Liberties Union of Washington Foundation. They are actually two separate entities based on the kind of work they do. So the American Civil Liberties Union of Washington is a membership organization and engages in nonpartisan lobbying and legislative activities at a federal level, state, local, etc. That's the 501c4, which means that you can donate to them, but it's actually not tax exempt. It's a membership organization.
I see.
Exactly.
Okay.
The ACLU of Washington Foundation is primarily involved in civil liberties litigation, research, communication activities. It technically does not lobby as a political force. It is designated by the IRS as a 501c3, which means that it may receive contributions that are tax deductible by the contributor. Federal law limits the extent the ACLU of Washington Foundation can lobby.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that is complex.
Yeah, but they share one website. So if you go to the ACLUWashington.org or whatever their URL is, just ACLU of Washington, you scroll down to the bottom and there's actually a little link where you can actually read about the fact that they just share a website.
That's interesting. So is that the structure for all divisions across the country?
Because this is federal law.
Yeah.
But it's a great, fantastic example. They just share a website, but there's actually two organizations. Where you send your money depends on your tax-exempt status. Most lobbying activity is done by the Civil Liberties Union of Washington. By contrast, ACLU's litigation and communications efforts described on their website is done by the Washington Foundation. And the difference is they use that key language, communication efforts, is they can't lobby for specific policy, but they can communicate about issues.
Okay.
They can raise awareness about issues. They can share factual information. It's key information. The word communications is coded language there. It's in statute.
I see.
So that's a fantastic example of like the bifurcated nature of our tax status, is that to get tax exempt status, what's important here is that you cannot lobby for specific policy.
Okay.
Harvard has not done that, at least not defined by the tax code in any traditional sense, but Trump is going to try and abuse that anyways. Wow. And so I wanted to sit down and talk about like what can Harvard do if the Trump administration is serious about revoking their tax status. They have not done that yet. There's just been whispers about it, which is kind of the point. Trump, just the threat of removing tax exempt status will be enough to make most higher education institutions shit their pants.
Yeah.
The reason he's targeted the Ivy League is that it's a symbol where he can apply a lot of force over a very small surface area because it's only 7 schools, right?
Yeah,
most of them, most of them are self-interested. If he can take and break these 7, he doesn't have to go after the rest because they'll all fall in line.
It's a cultural
a
objective.
cultural icon. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a culture war. He's not trying to curtail the Ivy League. He's trying to break them.
Wow.
Right. And so, so let's entertain the outcome of like all their tax exempt status is stripped. What can the IRS do?
You mean Harvard?
Oh, excuse me. No, yeah, IRS will go after them for taxes, better or worse. What can Harvard do? Thank you for the correction. Initially, Harvard could pursue administrative remedies. So the IRS actually has like a pretty robust appeals and dispute resolution service. Section 7123 of the tax code appeals dispute resolution proceedings. Basically, Harvard can go to the IRS and be like, what gives? The IRS has what's called the Independent Office of Appeals. Theoretically has independent hearing officers and administrative judges, but admin law, they are ultimately all executive branch employees. It's the same thing with our immigration system. I keep telling everyone this. They're like, oh, immigration judge. They're not an Article 3 court. That's why you see so much goofy shit coming out of immigration court because they're not judges. They're not judicial employees. Same here.
Okay.
It's independent in the same way that like the independent overseers that Trump tried to fire are independent. Right? Under normal circumstances, they would be. And basically, the Harvard could go for a lengthy appeal and review process. I think there's like 2 or 3 layers of hearing officers you can go through. But then I've gotten some questions about could Harvard seek judicial review? And the answer is yes.
Good.
Under USC section 7428, declaratory judgments relating to the status and classification of organizations under 501c3, the Harvard University may file a declaratory judgment action in the United States Tax Court, the Court of Federal Claims, or the District Court of the District Court for the District of Columbia. So what's important here, the big takeaway is that there is options for judicial review.
Good.
Right? There is great deference by the judicial branch when offering like, and we'll get into this in a moment, offering deference to tax collectors because the government is basically going to make sure the government can collect its money, even at hardship to private parties.
P1.
But what's important here is it gets the matter away from the executive branch, provided it's contingent on first Harvard exhausting all of its administrative options.
Okay.
Yeah. So first they've got to toe the line and go through the IRS's system. I imagine Trump will try and make sure that process is as slow as possible to make it as painful as possible because Trump doesn't necessarily need to win here. He just needs to make it painful enough that no one else will try it.
Yes.
Because Harvard is in a unique position of having a ton of fucking money.
Yes.
Harvard has a ton of fucking money, and most schools don't.
That's true.
A lot of schools, most of their funding comes from the federal or state governments.
Yeah.
So they've got to go through all administrative remedies offered by the IRS. Additionally, once they lose their last IRS administrative appeal, you have to initiate a 7428 action within 91 days of receiving the IRS's determination notice.
Jeez.
So they have 90 days to do it. Don't worry. Don't worry about Harvard. They've got enough lawyers to make that deadline.
Yeah.
But you can go and run to the judicial branch. Alternatively, Harvard could just accept the outcome from the IRS, pay the taxes assessed as appropriate, do the revocation, and then file a refund suit in federal court under 26 USCS section 7422. That's a bunch of gobbledygook to me, and they could pay the taxes, and then they could sue the government saying you shouldn't have collected them.
That's interesting.
Now,
that seems kind of more likely to me.
Yeah. So the distinction between a 7428 and a 7422, very clear. I love tax law. The second, the refund suit allows the IRS to challenge it de novo. De novo means like new. It basically means with no prior, like technically it's like no prior history to the case.
Okay.
A non-de novo review is that the court looks back at what's already happened, but this is a fresh look, right? Which the prior proceedings are based on the administrative record. So that's the crucial distinction. However, this approach allows Harvard to directly challenge the legality of the IRS's revocation, which prior does not provide as many direct avenues. And de novo proceedings have come out in taxpayers' favor. I found a case called Bob Jones University versus Simon 416 US 72 and Z Saint v. Koskian 791 Federal 3rd Reporter 24. There have been other cases that what matters is that there have been other cases that have come out favorable in such similar circumstances where there's an educational institution versus the federal government. However, this will take a long time.
Yeah.
And the financial duties assessed from bringing attorneys to bring this dispute to federal court.
Yeah, this will be expensive.
Yeah, you'd need to pay the disputed taxes up front before seeking judicial relief. And it's important to note that pre-enforcement judicial reviews, such as seeking an injunction to prevent the IRS from revoking tax-exempt status, is not allowed generally.
Really?
Yeah. So under the Anti-Injunction Act, 26 USCS 7421A, the Supreme Court has upheld general prohibitions emphasizing the government's interest in protecting the tax system from premature judicial interference, even though it may result in financial hardship for the affected organization or parties. Basically, the government will take its money first, and then maybe you can get it back later. Their injunctive relief is probably not an option under this.
Jeez.
Yeah, under this revenue model to like confront the IRS directly in judicial court for a refund proceeding. I think, in summary, we may end up paying a lot of interest to Harvard because Harvard, to all facts available to me, will eventually win this. Eventually. It might take like 2 or 3 years or 4. The important part, I've gotten some questions about predictions of what I think will happen. The important part is that they've decided to fight.
Yes.
That's the hard part, right?
Yes.
I think they're going to go all the way to Matt through administrative appeals, through the federal courts, all the way. If I were Harvard, I think between the very limited knowledge I have of the tax code, I would go in for a refund suit because Harvard has the financial resources to do that, rather than judicial review of the IRS's work.
Yeah.
Because the judicial branch tends to give a lot of deference to administrative proceedings, but then again, Chevron deference, with Chevron deference out the wazoo last a couple months ago, which is something we haven't gone over yet. Who knows what the framework is here, or even if it even applies. This is sort of my quick and dirty impressions.
Okay.
But like the big takeaway is that Harvard's fighting.
Yes, that's what I was most happy to hear about this story. And I wanted to mention real quick, straight from the Harvard Crimson, in the 24 hours after the university announced that they would not be complying with these orders, the university received more than 3,800 online donations, totaling more than $1 million.
Wow.
So the people were very happy to hear that Harvard is standing up to this, and I'm happy to hear that as well.
Well, and that's the calculation, is that Harvard would give up its teaching independence. Harvard.edu, their website, was remade overnight the night they made the announcement that they're not going to comply. It was remade into a really beautiful interactive experience explaining to the public like what Harvard does and what benefits they get from their federal funding.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a lot to go through, but I'd recommend people go check it out. It was a masterclass in pivoting HR, like engaging active matters like as they happen and displaying your values.
Yeah.
I think Columbia going first, complying with the Trump administration, and then immediately getting hit with a baseball bat anyways. I think that was a real miscalculation on the Trump administration's part, because if there's one thing you know about holding someone for ransom, is that you keep your word when people pay you the money.
Yeah.
Because if you can get away with that once, but then like once everyone sees that you'll double cross them even if they pay you the money, then there's no more incentive to pay the money and capitulate.
Yeah,
because
you know that it's just going to get worse.
You're going to pay the money and then they're going to rob you anyways.
They're going to break their promise.
And that's, I think, what Trump has done here. He's gotten so aggressive. There's no better opponent than overplays their hand, that like overestimates their strength, overestimates their speed and agility, and then doesn't train hard, doesn't think hard about the coming fight, just charges in and starts flailing. You see long-term tactical mistakes like this. So I really wanted to talk to people about the fact that like administrative proceedings are not the final recourse. The judicial branch will step in here.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear about that.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed for Harvard.
Yeah, fingers crossed for the poor downtrodden underdogs of Harvard University.
I wonder, now that Harvard has fought back against this, will the Trump administration go after more universities, or will they just kind of take this one pushback and be like, okay, we'll stop trying to do this now?
Well, Trump, he's in a difficult position where he needs to display strength.
Yes.
And Harvard remains a symbol. And so if he backing down at all under any circumstances is bad. He never does it.
Yeah. No.
But even if he could, this is such a powerful symbol that if he backs down from this fight in particular, he'll basically lose his mandate across all of higher education.
That's true.
And that's pretty. And again, this has resulted in really interesting political risks. President Bukele, the El Salvadorian people only accepted the suspension of civil rights because they felt they were locking up criminals. This debacle with the Maryland father is politically bad for Bukele because I've seen El Salvadorians online being like, this guy isn't a terrorist. We don't.
Nice.
Are we just locking people up? And I think the cracks and only having one direction on the track will, I think, in the long run, really erode the strength out from under the Trump appearance.
Definitely. Which
is all he is. He needs that bully appearance to project the air of strength and feel like a man of action. And if he doesn't maintain his momentum, he's like a shark. He'll drown if he stops.
Wow.
So really interesting stuff in the news. I don't hear many people talking about what Harvard can actually do, but just that Harvard is doing it, which is the important part.
Yay, and that's what we like to hear.
Any final thoughts, Lindsey?
Keep fighting, folks.
Amen. And don't get distracted. If you notice, Trump always makes more and more inflammatory statements right around the times when he's losing major fights. So when you hear like suddenly Trump surrogates going on Fox News and talking about how they're working on a third term, which is what Steve Bannon did just yesterday.
Yes, I heard about that.
That's why. That's also why we don't cover all the stuff the Trump administration does, just the big stuff. Because if you fall for the dead cat, they're gonna get away with 10 other things out the door, behind the wall.
Yeah, stay on top of it.
Yeah. So everybody stay safe. Support for the show comes from Hemmat Law, whether you need fantastic attorneys or just want to join an amazing legal team, go to hemmatlaw.com/GWP. Thank you to our sponsors, NordVPN and Quimby Bar Prep. We will talk to you guys very soon. This News Without Prejudice, a lot of stuff unfolding. It's like drinking from a fire hose, but please stay focused and stay safe, guys.
Thank you so much. Bye.